Good afternoon. In recent months, national news has been dominated by images of mistrust and protests, bringing the attention to the climate of racial equality in our society. The illusion of post-racial society is disappearing, revealing a country where race continues to matter. The cries for equity and fairness are drowned by violence. The actions of a few define our expectations. Mothers fear for their black sons, and law enforcement officers struggle to protect and serve because we're all under attack. We're all trying to make sense of a climate in which we question the value of all lives, the importance of community, and the realization of a dream. As we turn our focus to the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., inevitably we see comparisons and struggle to define the tone of the new civil rights movement, drawing upon our past and looking forward to the future, asking the questions: where do we go from here? How do we overcome real and perceived inequalities? How do we demand fairness and justice? How do we learn to trust our neighbors? And how do we create our beloved community? Our keynote speaker today is Dr. William Smith, the founding director of the National Center of Race Amity. And it is the idea of race amity that provides one meaning of moving forward. Race amity challenges the notion that our public discourse on race relations must follow the blame or grievance framework, but instead of embracing a tradition of association, amity, and collaboration. An idea that clearly Dr. King understood. An idea that is at the core of the adoption of a nonviolent agenda with a goal to create a beloved community. We gathered today to celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to ruminate on the agenda laid out more than half a century ago, to remind ourselves that while we continue to wrestle with the many of the same issues we have before, we must be vigilant in our quest to move forward. I would like to welcome you to the 2015 Otterbein University Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. And now, Natasha Shorts.
Would you all join me in bowing your heads for prayer? Dear Creator of heaven and earth, today we gather in your spirit in memory and celebration of your servant and prophet, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As this event unfolds, allow the words said here to inspire and encourage us to love and care for one another and to create and maintain a beloved community. As we seek opportunities to restore right relationships among ourselves, help us to be courageous so that we may protect all of your people and live in a healthy and peaceful world. Allow this occasion to encourage us to seek justice for all your children. In your son's precious name, amen. Please stand and join us with the Otterbein Gospel Choir in singing the national anthem for Blacks. Lift every voice and sing.
On the reverse side of your
Rolling sea.
Thank you.
In April of 1957, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was invited to Brandeis University as part of the Helmsley Lecture Series on race relations. In this lecture, Dr. King presents the theory and practice of nonviolent resistance. Dr. King's idea of nonviolence had 6 key principles. Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. Nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. Nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. And nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence grew throughout his lifetime. He saw nonviolence as the only way to create the beloved community. We now present selections from Justice Without Violence. The first thing that we can say about this method that seeks justice without violence is that it is not a method of cowardice or stagnant passivity. It's not a method to be used by persons filled with fear, by persons who are merely lacking in weapons of violence. It is not a method of cowardice. As Mahatma Gandhi used to say, if the only alternative is that between violence and cowardice, I would say use violence, but it is good that there is another alternative. And this is not a method of cowardice, and I also said that it is not a method of stagnant passivity. Sometimes the word passive misleads us because it gives the impression that this is a sort of sit-down, do-nothing method, the sort of method that is non-active. But non-violence does not mean non-activity. The nonviolent resistor is just as opposed to the evil that he is protesting against, as is the violent resistor. The method does resist. Now, it is true that this method is passive in the sense that the nonviolent resistor is not aggressive toward his opponent in a physical sense, with physical violence. But the mind and emotions are always active, and every moment seeking to convince and to persuade the opponent that he is wrong.
There are certain things we can say about this method that seeks justice without violence. It does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. I think that this is one of the points, one of the basic points, one of the basic distinguishing points between violence and nonviolence. The ultimate end of violence is to defeat the opponent. The ultimate end of nonviolence is to win the friendship of the opponent. It is necessary to boycott sometimes, but the nonviolent resistor realized that boycott is never an end within itself, but merely a means to awaken a sense of shame within the oppressor. That the end is reconciliation. The end is shame. And so the aftermath of violence is bitterness. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, a method that seeks to transform and to redeem and win the friendship of the opponent, and make it possible for men to live together as brothers in a community and not to continually live with bitterness and friction.
A third thing that we can say about this method is that it directs its attack at systems of evil rather than individuals caught up in the system. In other words, this method seeks to defeat evil rather than individuals who may happen to be victimized by evil. And this is the thing that we must see in race relations. As I like to say to the people in Montgomery, the tension in this city is not so much between Negro people and white people, but the tension is at bottom between justice and injustice. Between the forces of life and the forces of darkness. And if that is the victory cry in Montgomery, it will not be a victory merely for the 50,000 Negroes, but it will be a victory for justice, a victory for the forces of life, a victory for goodwill. Again, we seek to defeat the evil system rather than individuals caught up in the system. And I think that is a vital aspect with the method of nonviolence. Violence defeats individuals and so often fails to get back to the casual factor. Nonviolence goes beneath the surface and seeks to remove the cause or basis, which is the evil system itself.
There is one more basic thing about this method which seeks to achieve justice through nonviolence. It not only avoids external physical violence, but also internal violence of the spirit. The nonviolent resistor realizes that love should forever be at the forefront of his thinking. And as we struggle for justice, as oppressed people all over the world struggle for justice and freedom and human dignity, it is my great hope that we will never succumb to the temptation of indulging in hate campaigns or becoming bitter. For if we hate for hate, if we try to solve the problem by hating in return, we do nothing but intensify the existence of hate in the universe. And somebody has to have some sense in this world and cut off the chain of hate. That is done through loving. So this is a method that not only avoids external physical violence, but also internal violence of the spirit, which is hate and bitterness and malice. Oppressed people must continue to fight for justice passionately, fight at all times with clean hands, always avoiding malice and hate, always avoiding bitterness and falsehood.
Come over me. You changed my life, and now I'm free. He washed away
Dr. William H. Smith is the founding executive director for the National Center of Race Amnesty based on Willock College in Boston, Massachusetts. After graduating from Sterling High School, Smith's initial college career began in integrating Division I football in the old Confederate South at Wake Forest College. He was profiled in Sports Illustrated cover story as one of the pioneers who changed the face of college football. He left Wake Forest to work as a community organizer in the civil rights movement and was drafted into the United States Army. He graduated with honors from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst after serving as a medic in Vietnam, where he was awarded 2 Bronze Star Stars in the Combat Medic Badge. He also earned his doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Dr. Smith has addressed issues of race and diversity in his work with civic, philanthropic, and religious organizations, including the Phillips Stokes Fund, where he worked for 5 years as a trustee and secretary of the Board of Trustees and senior fellow. Also on the Regional Baha'i Council for Northeast States, on which he served for 10 years. He also served as the media advisor to the National Association for Black Veterans and the board of directors of the Africa Media Project. In 2000, he organized a historic joint resolution of the United States Congress establishing a National Day of Honor to recognize the service of African American and other minority soldiers in World War II. In conjunction with that event, he wrote and produced an award-winning documentary film titled The Invisible Soldiers, Unheard Voices, which aired nationally on PBS. Smith coordinated the following national initiatives. They are called National Conversations on Race, A Talk Worth Having, and Campus Conversations on Race. He founded the Campus Conversations on Race College Network that has 23 member colleges and growing. A second national program created by Smith is the Middle School Race Amity Theater Project, which uses theater to teach moral reasoning to middle and high schoolers. The first MSRATP production, Zenona and Grand Dragon X by Jackie Parker, is the story of surprising friendship between Zenona Clayton, a civil rights leader working with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Calvin Craig, a former Grand Dragon of the Georgia Ku Klux Klan. Zenona and the Grand Dragon X is being distributed to schools nationally. Smith has received awards from numerous organizations, including the International Academy of Communication, Arts, and Sciences, the National Association for Black Veterans, Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame, Screen Actors Guild Diversity and Production Award, National Association of Government Communicators, and honors from the National Education Association. Presently, along with NCRA core mission activities, Dr. Smith is providing leadership to the initiative Towards E Pluribus Unum, which he organized. The National Center for Race Amity launched 3 interrelated initiative supports towards E Pluribus Unum. The first initiative developed the annual Boston Race Amity Conference on the Rose Kennedy Greenway. The second initiative is to have the second Sunday in June establish the National Race Amity Day through a joint resolution of Congress and our presidential proclamation. The third initiative of Towards E Pluribus Unum was to organize and host an annual National Race Amity Conference, which has been held in Boston, Massachusetts since 2011. Smith is presently serving as an executive producer of the documentary titled An American Story, Race Amity and the Other Tradition, for air on public television in 2015. Please join me in welcoming Dr. William H. Smith.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good afternoon. Oh, come on now. Y'all got to be out there with me. I got up at 3:30 this morning to get on the plane at 6 to be here with you. So let me know that you want me to be here. Good afternoon. Thank you, Audubon, for having me to give this convocation on ML King Day, Martin Luther King Day. This convocation, from my perspective and from my purpose of being here, is oriented to action. So my gauging of my effectiveness of being here is at the end of the day, and I will check back later with James Prysock and Lisa in the Office of Diversity to see just what's cooking, what's happening, what new momentum, what new zip in your hip has come about in part by the discussions that we're going to have today, this afternoon. First, I need you to say a little bit about the idea of amity, which is the key to our identity at the National Center for Race Amity. And why that word? A lot of my close friends, when I was forming the center, I say, Smitty, the National Center for Race Amity. That's just doesn't stick, man. There's something, people are gonna confuse it, enmity and all of these other words. But I, being the supreme optimist, said, well, gee, about 15 years ago, my friend Susan over at Harvard, I was looking up for some information, and Sue said to me, she said, Smitty, she said, why don't you Google it? And I say, what? Google it. I say, Google? That's a weird word. Well, what is Google? Nobody's heard of Google. Well, we all know now that Google is a verb, noun, adverb, everything. So we have the optimism, and actually we've seen it happen on a national scale more and more. Information and publications and leaders of thought have begun to pepper their conversations with the word amity. So we're sort of getting a little toho, but it comes from just basic common sense thinking. And that is that in the realm of human relationships, there are two groups of people that we care deeply about. The first is family, right? We all love our families. As I was saying to the group this morning, even those crazy members of our family, and I have a few in my family, maybe you all have just total good people, but we love our families. We care about them, and we'll go to great strides to do things for them, to help them, to assist them. We'll sacrifice for them. And the same thing extends to our friends. In fact, in some situations, there are friends that we might love more than family members. You've heard people say, well, man, I love him as a brother. I love him more than a brother. And we will do great things. We will make sacrifices for our friends. So our thinking at the National Center for Race Amity is to the extent that we can create close cross-racial friendships, is to the extent that we can create bonds that are indissoluble. They won't break down under any condition, that they will be there in the roughest of times, in the toughest of times. And nay, we even know that in true friendships, people will give great sacrifice, sometimes even their lives. So our business is about the work of creating close cross-racial friendships. You've heard listing of the programs that the center is engaged in, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about those. There's one that I will mention, though, that asks you to keep before you, and that's our present effort to establish the second Sunday in June as National Race Amity Day. And this is a movement that's been going on now for a couple of years, and it's sort of weaving its way up through Congress. We think that it can have an impact on shifting somewhat the way we look at one another across the racial divide. Because the day, what does that day call for, is simply that Americans look across at their fellow citizens across racial and cultural lines with an eye of appreciation and respect in recognition of our national motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one. So it's going to be, we think we'll be able to get this done. We have been doing it in Massachusetts through gubernatorial proclamations for 3 years, and this year the Massachusetts state governing body, the Great Court of Massachusetts, Great and General Court of Massachusetts, is actually passing a bill, I should say, that will establish Race Amity Day in perpetuity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. One other thing I want to mention and give an open invitation to all of you is our National Race Amity Conference that we have each year, and it's in November. So we invite students and faculty to come and join us, come visit the great city of Boston, and participate in this conference that is small by conference standards and it's small by design. We never want this conference to exceed 300 people. There's a purpose for that. Though we have national leaders who come and speak, we hold our sessions literally to about 20 participants per session. The only time there's a large gathering like this is when we have a keynote, but all the sessions are intimate. The idea is that we want to have people to be able to get up close and personal and share ideas, and that there's real moral cross-pollination, we call it, sharing of ideas. So check our website, and we have an open invitation to Otterbein or some representatives from Otterbein to join us next year. We had, 16 colleges as a part of the conference this past year, and of course people from other organizations. This conference, incidentally, the idea of it really originated almost 100 years ago. In 1919, historically in U.S. history, the summer of 1919 was called the Red Summer. And it was called the Red Summer because of the bloody race rioting that took place. And it was principally, sadly, in that after World War I, with black soldiers coming back, those who fought in France, a deepening and growing depression in this country, the lack of jobs and opportunities, blacks wishing to assert themselves for these jobs and opportunities, pulled out some of the most negative behavior from white fellow citizens that we've experienced in America. And people were set upon, beaten, killed, lynched, mobbed. And so this country was in great turmoil. But a group of folk came together and decided we need to do something to see if we can impact and set a different tone in America. And so they came up with this idea of having a national race amity, racial friendship conference. And so 90 years later in 2011, the National Center decided that we need to revive that concept and that idea. All of these ideas, incidentally, are shared on our website. And I'm sort of short-circuiting some of the things I was going to share because Brother Price, I say, Smitty, you got to keep it within 25 minutes or so. So I'm very mindful of that because somewhere in my deeper veins, is my ancestral calling. I come from I'm not a Baptist, I'm a Baha'i, but I come from a long, long line of Baptist preachers, and they can talk a bit. And when I get up and get the mic, I somehow drift toward that part of me. But I'm going to try and keep this within that framework. But I want to share some ideas and some thoughts and tell you a bit about our work. And one of the key aspects of it relates to a concept that we call the other tradition. Now, this concept, which you will be hearing more about, I promise you, it was actually initiated in a book in 1996 by Dr. Richard W. Thomas, who's now Professor Emeritus of History at Michigan State University. And Richard is retired. And Richard actually was my mentor. And Richard says to me, he says, Smitty, don't tell people I'm your mentor. That make people think I'm old, man. And I said, well, Richard, you're old, brother. But Richard made this very astute observation, and it's a subject actually, it's moved forward into the work that we do at the center. In fact, the center's philosophy is built around this concept of the other tradition. In the PBS film we're working on presently, has it in the title, An American Story, Race Amity, and the Other Tradition. But here's Richard's thesis, and that is that we're all familiar with the tradition of racism in America. The racist, virtually everybody can point out something, some aspect of this racist history that's occurred in our nation. Richard points out that throughout our history, while this racist tradition was oppressing people, doing violent things to people, that there's always a parallel moral counterweight to the racism. And it is there was always, and always has been in our history, a group of people who have formed organizations and movements to push back against racism. And in fact, Richard goes so far, and we are actually digging deep into this history. The thesis states that there has been no lasting progress in America that is not bereft of close cross-racial, cross-cultural collaboration and friendship. Going back to the founding days of this country. Now, people generally make quick statements about America and its development. And they say, oh, this was a racist country, always has been, it was founded on racism, always been. And the other tradition says, well, wait a minute. That's not quite true. I just came back from a location shooting last week. We're down on the Virginia Peninsula in Northampton, Virginia, which is one of the oldest settlements, well, right after Jamestown, in America. And I was looking at records. It has the oldest continuous records, court records in America, going back to 1632. So I'm sitting in the old courthouse, and I actually have these antique documents in my hand, and I'm reading how the local court decided to award the custody of a young orphan, a young child who had been orphaned, whose parents had died. They were going to put this child in the care of the Harmon family, and they were choosing the Harmon family because the Harmons were landowners. They had children of the same age, and they were good and upstanding citizens. Well, the Harmons were black people, black family. And then I'm reading further, and we see where Anthony, also known as Antonio the Negro, Anthony Johnson, takes Mr. Bennett to court and sues him in a suit, property suit, about the ownership of a calf named Cherry. And this matter ultimately was adjudicated in favor of Anthony Johnson. This is interesting. So it sort of is a little pushback and a little different perspective on early America. It's not quite the early America that we so quickly leap to. Now, things did turn ugly, and they turned ugly by a series of events, interestingly, of people developing friendships and comradeships between indentured servants there were black indentured servants as well as white, and black slaves collaborating and running away from the rich landowners. And so this sort of ultimately led to Bacon's Rebellion, which scared the bejesus out of the wealthy landowners and people in charge, because this was almost like a populist guerrilla movement of black and white people and some Indians against the authorities that be. This was scary to them. And so shortly thereafter, of course, we enacted the slave codes of 1705. And that's when legally and historically racism, that racist tradition, really got its basic foothold. And because of greed, selfishness, and all the other attendant evils, grew and strengthened into this monster that unfortunately all of us sitting here, being here in this room today together, are trying to see how do we divest ourselves from this. We didn't bring this on ourselves, and I don't want you to feel that you did bring it on yourselves, because we didn't. What lies with us is how do we change, how do we escape it? And in our history, there are models for this. There are models that are overlooked. There are models that we don't talk about, that we don't separate, that do not allow us to see the goodness of each other, that do not allow us to see that everybody can bring something to the table, that do not allow us to see that, no, I can't blame you for something that you didn't do, but I can blame you for something that you won't do. So this idea of amity, of the other tradition, allows us to take a fresh look, a new look of how we communicate, how we interact. And the question is, can we arise to the challenge? That's the question of the day. One of the things that concerned me deeply about our present condition is I'm concerned about my white children out there. Now, let me tell you what that's about. Yeah, I'm in an interracial marriage, but I don't mean it that way. What I'm talking about is how I had a sign 2 weeks ago. I was marching in Boston and in Newton, protesting the murders of the young black men that we're all so concerned about. And I put together my little sign, and my sign said, "They are all our sons and all our brothers." And extending that thought, that's the way I think about you young white people who are out here in the audience today. Just as I look at young black and brown kids and I think of them as an extension of being my children, I think of you in the same way. And I'm concerned about an aspect of your psychological lives and where you are and how I can do something to enable you to become engaged. Now, there's a lot of difficulty in getting into this racial discussion business, and there are all kinds of barriers. And we hear the word and the idea of white privilege. We hear the idea that you really don't know what it's like to be a black or a brown person. No, you don't. And that's okay. I can tell you this, to have a desire to be involved and engaged, but not figuring out a way to do it can be terribly frustrating. And I'll give it by way of an experience I had a long, long time ago. My wife and I were first married. We went out to Trinidad on a service project, and we were working in these poor communities. And all the Trinidadians would look at me, and they'd say, "Oh, the big black Yankee man. There he is, the big Yankee man, the big Yankee brother." And I say, "Well, no, man, I'm not a Yankee, man. I'm a black guy. I'm a brother just like you." "No, you a Yankee, man." And so no matter what I would say, I say, "Well, look, man, they treat black people horribly in America. You know, I'm under oppressive conditions. My community, I came from a poor family that some people in my family have less than what you have. I'm not a Yankee. I'm a brother." No matter what I said, no matter how I tried to explain it, I could not divest them of the notion that I was a big Yankee man. So those young white people out here in the audience, those of you who really want to engage in this work and be strong allies, sometimes you're going to get a young black or brown person say, "Well, hey, man, you can't get it because you're not black. You don't feel it." You see, and that's a frustration. But you don't have to feel it. You just have to proceed and step forward and do it. And one of the things that can enable you to do that deals with this area of concern that I have. Sadly, education has, for the most part, done us a genuine disservice, and particularly to white folks. You are not aware of who your moral heroes are. I ask young white kids, high school, middle school, elementary school, who's your racial hero? Who's your moral hero? They jump out, Martin Luther King. They'll jump out, they even go to Malawi. They don't have an identity or people recognizable that you can call to mind that you know was a white person in a difficult situation and who made some heroic choices and brought about change. I live in Boston, and many times, and one of my heroes is a gentleman by the name of Daniel O'Connell. Are there any people out here of Irish descent? Are you familiar with Daniel? Daniel was a bad, bad boy. Now, he was. Big Dan. There are books written about Dan. Dan's greatest history is that he was the emancipator in Ireland. In other words, he led the movement to break Ireland from the Church of England. Some say he's the instigator who started the Irish Republican Army. But nonetheless, Dan was a towering figure in Ireland and its emancipation from England. But Daniel O'Connell was also the fiercest abolitionist of the period. I mean, this guy made American abolitionists seem like they were playing tiddlywinks. An idea. A lot of Irishmen in this country who owned land and who owned slaves always wanted to help the emancipation movement in Ireland. So they'd send Big Dan checks, money, serious money. And Dan had a hatred and disdain for slavery, for owning other people. And the first question Big Dan would ask, well, who sent this money? And they say, so-and-so from McGregor from Virginia. And they say, well, does this guy own slaves? Yeah, he's got a big plan. Send the money back. Send the money back. Don't even unpackage it. Send it back. Now, that's a serious commitment. That's a serious commitment. Big Dan wrote letters to leadership in this country, chastising them for owning other human beings. Big Dan had the reputation of being, at that time, in that period, one of the world's greatest orators. Now, Frederick Douglass, a name that you do know, Frederick Douglass was quite an orator himself. And Frederick Douglass heard about Big Dan O'Connell. Somebody came back to Boston and said, there's this guy, Daniel O'Connell, over in Ireland. And this guy is the greatest, one of the greatest orators on earth. And he's an abolitionist. Frederick Douglass literally got passage to go to Ireland to see this guy for two reasons. One, he was looking to meet an ally of such acclaim. And two, Frederick Douglass had an ego, which he should, and we all do. He said, well, this guy can't be the greatest orator because that's me. Because I want to meet the brother and hear him speak. Actually, they met. And here's what Frederick Douglass wrote about. It was a very simple statement. He went to an event and heard Big Dan O'Connell speak. And Frederick Douglass said, hearing Daniel O'Connell's voice was like hearing rain fall on a hot, dusty road on a summer's day. And he came back and revered Daniel O'Connell, and they never met again in person, but they maintained a correspondence relationship. But how good, you know, if I was an Irish person, I'd feel pretty good about that, man. I'd say, oh, yeah. Yeah, I have a large hero up in there, a model, a person who sacrificed, who did certain things. But throughout the course of history, we are replete with those types of personages. And there's something that I advise you and ask that you look into, learn more about, because they were people who were between a rock and a hard place and wanted to commit, and they made some really strong choices, and there are things that you could look at, know about, and emulate. I want to talk for just a few minutes before I get to the cutoff point here about this idea of e pluribus unum, because it's a very fundamental idea to America, and I think it's important. It's the banner for the center, and it's important that we know how this e pluribus unum came about and what does it mean. And it is our national motto. It's on our basic unit of currency. Those of you who have a dollar out there, if you look at it after this event, you'll be able to see, of course, the e pluribus unum signage on it and some of the things I'm going to share. In 1776, the U.S. Continental Congress authorized a committee to develop the Great Seal of the United States of America. This committee proposed several designs and a motto for the seal. The motto, E pluribus unum. None of the designs for the seal were accepted by the Continental Congress, but the motto was accepted. In 1782, the Continental Congress asked Charles Thomson, who was its secretary, to develop a design for the Great Seal of the United States. Now, Charles Thomson was a man of serious integrity and virtue. And Charles Thomson is one of our first race amity activists. This was to the extent that Chief Teddy Unskin, who was the chief of the Delaware Indian Nation, adopted Charles Thomson as an honorary member and trusted him with regard to translating and assisting in all the negotiations between the Delaware Indian Nation and the United States government. Now, so great was Charles Thomson's integrity that in that era, the time that he lived, if you wanted to verify the accuracy or the truth of something, you know, sometimes today people say, I swear on a stack of Bibles. Some of you have heard that expression. But in that day, if people wanted to declare the truthfulness of a matter, they say, this is as true as if Charles Thomson's hand was on it. Now, to add to Thomson's bona fides, as an early member of this pantheon of race amity heroes and heroines, I want to share just a quick excerpt from a letter that Charles Thomson wrote to one of his peers. And the peer happened to be Thomas Jefferson. Now, this maintaining his commitment to equity and access went beyond just his friendship with Teddy Unskin, the chief of the Delaware Nation. He said to Thomas Jefferson, "It grieves me to the soul that there should be just grounds for your apprehensions respecting the irritation that will be produced in the southern states by what you have said of slavery. However, I would not have you discouraged. This is a cancer. We must get rid of it. It is a blot on our character that must be wiped out. If it cannot be done by religion, reason, and philosophy, confident I am that it will be done by blood." This is a letter. This is his position to Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas is getting two barrels, man. He's getting it from Daniel O'Connell and Charles Thomson. Charles took the motto E pluribus unum that had been approved by Congress in 1776 and incorporated it into the Great Seal, which is the eagle with an olive branch in one hand, in one talon, and arrows in the other, symbolizing ours as a nation of peace on the one hand with a willingness to defend itself on the other. Charles Thompson used the inscription E pluribus unum as a written articulation on the ribbon that forms the semicircle under the obelisk on the seal of the United States. This initially referred to the peoples of European stock and the 13 colonies they populated. Of many one, that was a reference at that time. But it was a call for societal unity. Today, it appropriately represents the hope for our country that contains the diversity of the peoples of the world. So, we have these heroes and sheroes, and it's up to you. You can look more into them and find out some of the individuals. But I want to sort of wrap this up with a little engagement with you, because I've been standing here talking for quite some time. And I want to go back to Dr. King for that engagement, this closing engagement with you. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, and it bends towards justice. When people were impatient during the movement for progress, even after he made that statement and would make that statement, they would all ask him, Dr. King, how long do you think it will take until justice can be achieved? And Dr. King would say, how long? Not long. And that phrase, how long, not long, became a call and response engagement in many of the civil rights rallies and activities and events. And what I want to do is engage you in that call and response. And I'm going to ask you, how long? And I'm going to ask you, how long? Come on now, how long? How long? Okay, now you're getting your vocal cords warmed up. I'm going to shift this. And I'm going to talk about you. And I'm going to make a call statement. And if that call statement is one that you accept, you're going to stand and say, that's me. So let's try it. I'm going to listen. How long? How long? Okay, I'm going to shift now. I'm a sophomore at Otterbein. All right, one more time. Let's do another example. I watched one or more football games over the weekend. Okay. I'm a junior at Otterbein. Okay. All right, here goes. We're going for real now. Y'all ready? I have come here today to honor the memory and the life's work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I live in Ohio. I am a faculty or staff member at Otterbein University. I have entertained in my home someone who is a different race than I am. I have visited someone's home who is of a different race than I am. I have been followed in a store because of the color of my skin. I have been followed in a store because of the color of my skin. I believe things are better in this country for citizens of color than they were when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. Oh boy, what planet, I'm going to challenge you, what planet do you live on? What planet do you live on? I'm going to ask that question again. I believe things are better in this country for citizens of color than they were when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. I am outraged that in 2015, we continue to have huge disparities between whites and blacks in access to health care, income, wealth, justice, education, and freedom. I believe the words that Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in April of 1963 in his letter from a Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I believe that the shooting death of the young men in this nation is a symptom of a larger, pervasive problem in our country that we must address together. I believe that Black lives matter. I believe that all lives matter. I think we are one human family. I'll be sure and vote in the next presidential election. I will work towards e pluribus unum. I am committed to honoring Dr. King's legacy by continuing the work for social justice. How long? How long? Thank you.
Heaven is full of angels. The earth is full of men. If you need a place of solitude,
The Peace and Justice Award was established at Otterbein College in 1996 as a means of recognizing members of our community who exemplify the ideas of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Any faculty, staff member, student, or recognized Otterbein organization is eligible to receive this award. There are 4 main criteria that are used in selecting recipients for this award. First, the recipients are individuals or organizations who are involved in activities on the campus or in the community which serve to balance inequities. Next, through their actions, encourage others to do the same. The third criteria that recipients exhibit is that they promote equity and equality in the classroom and our community. Finally, they demonstrate the principles of nonviolence in solving problems. It is my pleasure to present the 2015 Martin Luther King Jr. Peace and Justice Award to the organization who clearly have met all of the award criteria. Through events such as the Pages to Film series, which brings together all kinds of people to share the common experience found in a good book, to efforts to raise awareness of social justice, issues through displays, programs, and a collection that is diverse and inclusive, allowing members of community to learn about key issues, each other, and ourselves. This staff promotes equity and equality in the community with innovative places such as the Aaron McKenzie Virtual Welcoming Space. It is with great pleasure that I present the 2015 Martin Luther King Jr. Peace and Justice Award to a team of people who recognize the value of lifelong learning, who connect the campus community to resources to help us understand diversity and inclusion, who work to make certain that everyone that walks into the lobby feels welcome, listened to, and accepted. Please join me in congratulating the staff of the Cartwright Memorial Library.
Thank you so much. And can I have the rest of the library staff stand to be recognized, and any students who work for the library and any volunteers who are in the audience, please stand.
Thank you.
This year's recipient of the Faculty Staff Peace and Justice Award is a faculty member who greatly impacts her students. Her classes are not only grounded in literary studies, but also in social activism. No student leaves one of her courses without understanding the embedded racist structures of the United States, both in the country's earliest years and today, and an awareness that they can make a difference. She advocates consistently for ongoing campus discussion on racial inequities, empowering students to go beyond superficial conversation. She provides insight and direction that help our students to advocate for themselves and for others. Her knowledge and insight are more vital than ever in this time, and it is with great enthusiasm that I ask you to join me in recognizing Dr. Phyllis Lynn Burns, the 2015 Faculty Staff Peace and Justice Award recipient. Unfortunately, she was unable to attend with us today, so I will be accepting the award on her behalf, but I'm sure that she would be very happy to see all of you.
Over the last year, the recipients of the Student Peace and Justice Award have courageously advocated for gender-inclusive housing on Otterbein's campus. In the process, they've worked to balance inequities, educate the campus about gender diversity, and enact change. More specifically, they've asked their university to live its commitment to social justice, progressiveness, diversity, and inclusiveness. And they've demonstrated a remarkable capacity to speak pressing need and deep conviction to the Otterbein community, and more importantly, its power brokers. They've taken issue to directors, committees, RAs, vice president, the president, and the university senate. And this February, they will carry the initiative to our board of trustees. Adrian Rich says that when one of us tells the truth, they make more truth around us possible, and these two enact those words. Our recipients personify the ethos of the Peace and Justice Award. They dream the dream, believe in a more compassionate and just future, and more importantly, they translate that hope into action. Please join me in recognizing my wonderful friends, Josh Brandon and Amelia Gramling, the 2015 Student Peace and Justice recipients.
Thank you so much. This means the world to me
you.
to be nominated, and yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and we couldn't have done this without our wonderful mentor, Suzanne Ashworth, who is the faculty member who has inspired us to continue passing this initiative through the pipeline.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we just give everybody who just won an award another round of applause, please? I just want to say again, congratulations to the 2015 Peace and Justice Award recipients. As we bring this convocation to a close, I would like to recognize the winners of the 2015 Multimedia Essay Contest and Art Contest. This is annual contest open to high school students. This year, students were asked to respond to the question, what examples can you give of race amity and how it has positively impacted your life, family, your friends, or your community? I want to say, please join us in the Fisher Gallery, which is right across the street, I believe, where the work of these students will be on display and a post-convocation reception will be held. We are eager to receive you. Now, I want to shift attention again and say that I began this convocation asking, where do we go from here? How do we overcome real and perceived inequalities? How do we demand fairness and justice? How do we trust our neighbors? How do we create our beloved community? While the answers may not be complete, I think we have a good foundation. The answers to these questions can be found in the words of Dr. King and in our keynote speaker, Dr. Smith. The actions of the Peace and Justice Award recipients as well. The music of the Otterbein Gospel Choir, and the commitment I am asking each and every one of you to make. Commit to getting to know one person each and every day. Commit to nonviolence. Commit to being courageous. I want to leave you with this quote by Anis Nin. Each friend represents a world in us, a world not born until they arrive, and it is only by this meeting of the two that the new world is born. The new world can be fair and just if we commit to making it so. Your relationships with people can be fair and just if you commit to making it so. Thank you.
In this convocation with our Hallelujah, Salvation, and Glory, I see alumni, I see inactive participants. Don't make me call your names. I ask that you please come up and join us. And as we prepare, y'all ain't moving. Ooh. Thank you. As we prepare for this last number, I want to thank Dr. Smitty from the bottom of my heart. Those words touched a place that you don't even know about, and I'm truly grateful to you for presenting today. I also want to make an open invitation to anyone, race, creed, color, whatever your religious denomination. We come on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock. We keep each other lifted up. It's a wonderful day to get rid of your frustrations. Come and sing. Don't tell me you can't sing. As a group, we can sing. We can sing. Thank you so very much.